video for you here tonight. Pardon my grammar. I just want to follow up on the video I did with Clint. Going into at the latter half of our stream, we were discussing the national emergencies in the United States, and essentially, we referenced the Senate document, which I've uploaded to my archive.org page, which I'll put in the description of this video. Senate Report 93 549, which was written in 1973. Written, I know Senator Frank Church of the Church Committee was one of the guys who drafted this report. And just interestingly, it was in the church. I cited the Church Committee report in the Dollar in the Vatican preface in the remastered book of Aber Manhattan's work, The Dollar in the Vatican, right here. This is the tab of it here. But in the Church Committee hearings in 1975, I'll get the exact quote here, just because it's some revealing information actually comes out of these committee hearings. But you can find this report. I believe I've uploaded this report to my archive.org page. Yeah, this is book 2 of the official government report of the 1975 U.S. Senate Church Committee hearing showed what grave extent freedom in America has sunk. That's my words here, but here's quoting from the report. Nearly 250,000 first-class letters were opened and photographed in the United States by the CIA, the Catholic Intelligence Agency, or capitalism's invisible army. Again, the Catholic Herald ran an article, and they actually gave the CIA the nickname Catholics in Action. But 250,000 first-class letters were opened and photographed by the CIA between 1953 and 1973, producing a CIA computerized index of nearly 1.5 million names. At least 130,000 first-class letters were opened and photographed by the FBI between 1940 and 1966 in 8 U.S. cities. The director of the FBI this time, J. Edgar Hoover, was given the Sword of Ignatius of Loyola. Ignatius Loyola being the founder of the Jesuit order. You can see the photo of J. Edgar Hoover receiving his Sword of Loyola. Some 300,000 individuals were indexed in a CIA computer system, and separate files were created on approximately 7,200 Americans in over 100 domestic groups during the course of CIA's Operation Chaos. The Operation Chaos was spying on the anti-war movement while the Catholic Crusade in Vietnam was taking place from the 50s to the whole decade of 1950 up to 1968. Millions of private telegrams sent from, to, or through the United States were obtained by the National Security Agency. And I showed on the stream with Clint, and we've covered this on previous Shruchi team briefs. I did a whole blog post on this. I have the document archived. The National Security Agency admits that the silver key in its logo represents it's their quote key to security, and it's the key. It's the Apostle Peter's key. It symbolizes the Apostle Peter's power of loosening and binding. And the Apostle Peter is the supposed first bishop of Rome. It says in the Catholic Catechism that the Pope is the Pope is the true successor of the Apostle Peter, and that Peter passed down the power of loosening and binding to the Pope. And this is on the National Security Agency's own website. So you can see that the National Security Agency, by spying everyone, is just acting as the confessional did in the Middle Ages. There's no difference. But you see here that this came out in an official government report in 1976 that millions of private telegrams sent through the United States were obtained by the National Security Agency from 1947 to 1975 under a secret arrangement with 3 United States telegraph companies. See, so ultimately, the Edward Snowden revelations, weren't, anything new. And Snowden himself is a co-intel agent. He comes from an intelligence family. All you got to look at is his whole family has Pentagon and CIA backgrounds. But Snowden verifies the official story on 9/11. He verifies all official, recent storylines. And Snowden his lawyer was Jesuit trained at Georgetown, Plato Chacharis, who is also the lawyer for Opus Dei devout Catholic Robert Philip Hansen, who for 25 years was giving top United States military secrets to the Soviet Union. But just finishing up from the Church report, I'm going to get into the national emergencies. And I found a bombshell document, President Theodore Roosevelt speaking to the Knights of Columbus in 1915. And that was in this book at Carnegie Hall, of all places, and that the U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt This came from a book, Immigration and Americanization, Selected Readings, compiled and edited by Philip Davis. And I'm going to read some of Theodore Roosevelt's speech. Roosevelt even talks about the need to militarize and to defend the United States. There's a very actually interesting quote. He says that American citizens need to put their full soul and being into defending the United States. And you see, and Roosevelt doesn't refer to it as the United States of America, because if you watch the stream we did with Clint, the United States is actually it's been incorporated via the 1871 Organic Act. But when they're referring to the United States, they're referring to a separate entity that's located at Washington, D.C. This is the corporation of D.C. that's sovereign to the United States, similar to how the Vatican has a sovereign city-state within Italy, and the City of London has a sovereign status within the country of England. But this is the report here that I'm going to go with. This was the report that Clinton was reading out, written in 1973, the report on a special committee on the termination of the national emergency, the United States Senate. And you can see they even have the Roman eagle right here on the Senate report. And the United States Senate has the Roman fasces, right on its logo. But let me finish up here just with the church committee. An estimated 100,000 Americans were subject of United States Army intelligence files created between the mid-1600s and 1971. Intelligence files on more than 11,000 individuals and groups were created by the Internal Revenue Service between 1969 and 1973, and tax investigations were started on the basis of political rather than tax criteria. At least 26,000 individuals were at one point cataloged on an FBI list of persons to be rounded up in the event of a, quote, national emergency. So you see, this all ties in. Actually, in the Senate, I was reading through some of this Senate report. I haven't read through this before, in its nearly in its full entirety before Clint brought this up. I was aware of the Emergency Banking Act of March 9th, 1933, but this report is a very detailed look at, the whole emergency power status. Look at here, the forward is pretty and it's admitted in the Senate report that even the Congress does no no one, only those initiated in the in the inner circle, if you will, that's actually admitted in this report. Only those in the know actually know the true nature of the president's emergency powers. That's actually admitted by the U.S. Congress report, which is very interesting. We look at this forward is very, and you see here, I mentioned on the show, I thought there were 18 active national emergencies. There's actually 31 current U.S. national emergencies. And you can see a list. Where is this here? Even on Wikipedia. I'll pull up that Wikipedia page, but there's a Wikipedia page that you can even see a list of all the active United States national emergencies, and there's 31. Jesuit-trained Donald Trump at Fordham signed the latest national emergency with the border situation. I'm just going to see if anyone's in the chat here, but I'm just going to read some of the report. And you see, Franklin D. Roosevelt was the Emergency Banking Act was the first, I guess, official. Well, actually, it goes back to Woodrow Wilson. This is the highest profile early case of the entire country or corporation of the United States being placed into a national emergency, and this is by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And I'm just going to show you that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and this report goes into how Theodore Roosevelt also is a big advocate of the national emergency. Theodore Roosevelt, we talked about in the show how the Pennsylvania State Police was created to essentially enforce commercial code and breaking up the strikers who were protesting slave wages in the coal and steel plants in the Northeast United States in the late 1800s. And Theodore Roosevelt, not surprisingly, was one of the biggest advocates of creating the Pennsylvania State Police, which was the first state police force in the United States. But here's a photo of Cardinal Pacelli with President Theodore Roosevelt. Where's he at? Pacelli and Roosevelt in a room here. Where is Roosevelt? Oh, there's Spellman with Pacelli. I know there's a photo of them together. Because Pacelli actually went to Roosevelt's house and had lunch there. Actually, this is mentioned on Eugenio Pacelli's visit to the United States. There he is with Knight of Malta, Joseph Kennedy. Joseph Kennedy was Roosevelt appointed Knight of Malta, Joseph Kennedy as his U.S. ambassador to the UK. But it's even referenced on Avro Manhattan, and the Dollar in the Vatican writes about this trip. And interestingly, Eugenio Pacelli stayed in the Innisfada mansion. That was the mansion of the Duchess Brady on Long Island that she completely gifted to the Jesuits. He gave them an entire mansion, and that's where Pacelli stayed. Yeah, but you see here, Vatican sources announced October 17th, 1936, that a meeting with Roosevelt would take place. And this just shows, I'm just pointing this out because the Vatican was, the force that was pushing, Roosevelt to pass this National Emergency Act. And this act, the Emergency Banking Act, which put the United States into a perpetual national emergency, this was signed the same year that the Vatican signed a Concordat with the Nazis. Not a coincidence whatsoever. Okay. You see here, he stayed at Roosevelt Field on Long Island. You see a meeting with Roosevelt. Pacelli finally met with Roosevelt at the president's home. Yeah, so Eugenio Pacelli, future Pope Pius XII, Hitler's Pope, met personally at Roosevelt. Here's Roosevelt's mansion in Hyde Park. And it's just so funny, Roosevelt, his New Deal, it's just, all it did was just, it government subsidized big business. Like before all you got to do is look at the list of biggest military contractors given out by the U.S. every year. Like they give $230 billion in corporate welfare. That's just mandated through the Congress. And Roosevelt signed an executive order creating the Export-Import Bank, which is basically the Export-Import Bank is just like a subsidy for big business. So what the New Deal actually did was got the government giving out contracts to the massive monopolies. That's all it did. Here's the Pew study, named after the aristocrat financial Robert Baron Pew family, even outed the Export-Import Bank here in a study in 2008. You see XM Bank, and this XM Bank was created by Roosevelt in an executive order because putting the United States in a perpetual national emergency gives the president the power now to sign executive orders. Usually the XM Bank provides to U.S. companies benefits a single corporate entity, the Boeing Company, the world's largest manufacturer of commercial jet airliners and military aircraft. In 2008 alone, the Export-Import Bank, which was created by an executive order by Franklin D. Roosevelt, authorized $356 million in direct loans, $10 billion in loan guarantees, and $3.9 billion of insurance. You see here, look at the sales to Boeing. This is 2008, so you can see this is what the New Deal actually did. And Roosevelt's daughter or Roosevelt's son married a DuPont girl. Literally, the Roosevelts married into the DuPont family. So was the New Deal really against big business when Roosevelt literally married into the DuPonts? The DuPont family at this time is quintessential. They represent big business and the aristocratic class. Especially in 1930, the DuPonts were a lot more powerful back then than they are now. You see here, but Boeing alone got 65% of the long-term loan guarantees by the XM Bank in 2008. Where was this sale here? $5.5 billion supported the sale of Boeing airplanes. It's in places such as Brazil, Canada, Ireland, and the United Arab Emirates. So I'm just pointing out that's all the New Deal actually did was get government financing big business. It wasn't revolutionary at all. Just the fraud historians promote both Franklin and Teddy Roosevelt as American heroes. It just follows both of them actually had an older uncle, James Roosevelt Bailey, who was a Catholic Archbishop of Newark, New Jersey. But you see here, so this is from the U.S. Intelligence Center Report 93-549. Since March 9, 1933, this is when Franklin D. Roosevelt was in office, the United States has been in a state of declared national emergency. In fact, there are now in effect 4 presidential proclaimed states of national emergency. I just showed you there's now 31 now in the United States. Making sure people getting my chat on here. Give me a second. Hey, good evening, guys. Yeah, I saw Poland's Sunday shopping ban. That's clearly the influence of the Vatican there. Poland still to this day, I would say, is a 95%, Catholic ethnic country. Absolutely no separation of church and state. But I'm just going to go read a little bit of this Senate report here on the national emergency. So, in fact, now they're in effect. So, but you see here, this is admitted by Congress. Since March 9, 1933, the United States has been in a state of declared national emergency. And Clint was reading the Senate document on the stream we did. You see here, in addition to the national emergency declared by President Roosevelt in 1933, there's also the national emergency proclaimed by President Truman on December 16th, 1950, during the Korean conflict. You know, President Truman actually attempted to set up full legal full United States diplomatic relations to the Vatican in 1952 when he appointed Knight of Malta General Mark Clark as the American ambassador to the Vatican, but it was shut down by Congress. And this is another thing. When Roosevelt went with Pacelli, like what Pacelli was actually planning was like they wanted to get some sort of diplomatic chain going back to the Vatican. And Roosevelt, and you see here in the picture, this is Myron Taylor, who is a Knight of Malta and the chairman and CEO of the United States Steel Corporation. And Myron Taylor is also the chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations. But Myron Taylor was actually sent over to the Vatican in 1936 as Franklin D. Roosevelt's, quote, personal representative to the Vatican. But that's part of what they were plotting. And Pacelli's visit to the United States, along with the national emergency, which puts the United States in perpetual military rule, which is feudalism, and the Vatican endorses feudalism. This is why still to this day, there's so much Roman fasci symbolism on all the United States logos, like United States military police, fasces, United States Senate, fasces, right there. This is all over the place. United States Sheriffs, United States Sheriffs Association, Roman fasces. This is all over the place. I'll just show you the one on the courts. Office, administrative. They look right here. The Administrative Office of the United States. You see, they call it the United States Court because the United States is the name of the corporation that has been set up. And this is key. In a book I really recommend you read is Tupper Saucy's The Rulers of Evil, because this is how the Jesuits wanted to set up the United States. Essentially, giving the president the power to declare a national emergency every time. Essentially, you're keeping the same feudal system and power of medieval Europe, where the king's rule was absolute. And that's essentially what the president is today. And I read the quote on the stream with Clint. Appleton's encyclopedia said that there was no greater power in America at the time of the Revolution than the Jesuits in John Carroll in Maryland. I'm paraphrasing, but you can read. That's on my blog. That's from Appleton's encyclopedia. For instance, let's go into a bit more of the Senate report here. So President Truman declared a national emergency December 16th, 1950. And I have footage on my channel. President Truman received an honorary degree from Jesuit Fordham University in 1946. And in the same year, 1946, he gave a Jesuit priest, Joseph O. Callahan, S.J., a chaplain of the United States Navy, a Medal of Honor. You hear President Nixon declared 2 national emergencies. And then you see that there's now 31 national emergencies in existence. Bill Clinton, Jesuit trained at Georgetown, Bill Clinton, I think, signed 7 national emergencies himself. And here's the FBI is referenced here. Another pertinent question among many is the special committee's work has revealed concerns the statutory authority for domestic surveillance by the FBI. According to some experts, the authority for domestic surveillance appears to be based upon an executive order issued by President Roosevelt during an emergency period. If it is correct that no firm statutory authority exists, then it is reasonable to suggest that the appropriate committees enact proper statutory authority for the FBI with adequate provision for oversight by Congress. So interesting. This is how the FBI legally justified, the domestic surveillance program. Now with the USA Patriot Act that was drafted by Jesuit Georgetown professor Vitin, the FBI can do basically whatever the fuck they want. Pardon my language. But up to this point, the FBI would use the national emergency statute signed by President Roosevelt. It's really interesting. Like President Roosevelt, 1 year after his national emergency, appointed Jesuit-trained Frank Murphy to the Supreme Court of the United States. You see, so like they give back. You can see, and I think the Jesuits probably they asked of Roosevelt is like, we want one of our guys, appointed to the Supreme Court. All the other guys Roosevelt appointed, were corporate stooges. But Frank Murphy was the Jesuit-trained lawyer Roosevelt appointed to the Supreme Court. You see, he raised him as a devout Catholic. This guy went to the University of Detroit Mercy. Give me a second here. Now I'm going to show you, Franklin D. Roosevelt's campaign manager to get him into office was a Knight of Malta, James Aloysius Farley. And James Farley then became a Knight of Malta after he was the head of the DNC and got FDR into office. James Farley became the chairman of Coca-Cola International. Actually, as you see, Frank Murphy is listed on the Jesuit University of Detroit Mercy alumni page. Frank Murphy. So here's the governor. Here's the mayor of Detroit as well, governor of Michigan. He was the last governor general of the Philippines while it was occupied by the United States. And this was Roosevelt's one of his Supreme Court picks. Devout Catholic, Jesuit-trained William Francis Murphy. And I'll show you a photo here. Roosevelt actually went to Jesuit Fordham University like Truman did, but Roosevelt went in 1940, and you can actually see him with the FBI or the Jesuit priest Robert Ignatius Gannon, who said that the FBI and Fordham had the same ideas. That quote comes from Steve Brossom's book, The FBI and the Catholic Church. But here's Franklin D. Roosevelt, the 32-degree Scottish Rite Freemason, and I showed him this. I brought it up at the stream with Clint. The Scottish Rite Masons. I have a blog post on this. The motto of the Scottish Rite Masonry's 32nd degree is Ad Morgium Al Gloriam, which is the motto of the Jesuits. Roosevelt was a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason. But here's Franklin D. Roosevelt with Jesuit Robert Ignatius Gannon, S.J. Center at Fordham, meets Jesuit Fordham students in 1940. And you see Roosevelt laughing it up with the Jesuit Robert I. Gannon. You see? And there's a really interesting quote from I just want to read with Gannon from this is what James J. Murphy said, the author of the Converted Catholic magazine. But it's interesting. He basically said that he implies that Cardinal Spellman, who went to Jesuit Fordham University, was a puppet of this Robert Ignatius Gannon, which is really interesting because E. Howard Hunt, and this is all documented on my blog. E. Howard Hunt, a CIA agent, in an interview on the Canadian television series Turning Points of History, in a documentary named A Coup Made in America in 1998, said that while E. Howard Hunt, the CIA agent, was in Guatemala, it was Cardinal Spellman, the Catholic Archbishop of New York, who was actually directing the mission for the CIA. And then E. Howard Hunt goes on to say that the Jesuits form the greatest intelligence service in the world and always have. Here's the quote that J.J. Murphy said, and this is from an article from the May 1946 issue of the Converted Catholic magazine titled Internationalizing of the College of Cardinals. This is what Murphy said. Cardinal Spellman is typical of the subservient Jesuit-dominated prelate of today. As far as the Jesuits are concerned, he is just as safe and obedient as the most simple-minded Italian prelate ever was. He, Cardinal Spellman, even took his Jesuit political mentor, Father Gannon, of Fordham University. This is the same Father Ignatius Gannon you see here laughing it up with FDR at Jesuit Fordham in 1940. And again, when Truman went to Fordham, Truman, the first thing Harry Truman said, I have the dialogue up on my blog and I have the video or the audio on my channel. Harry Truman, we accepted his honorary degree at Jesuit Fordham. The very first thing he did was, I thank you so much, Robert I. Gannon, for being he called him your eminence, Robert I. Gannon. You see here, so Spellman took his Jesuit political mentor, Father Gannon of Jesuit Fordham University, with him on his recent trip to Rome, just to make it certain that he, Spellman, would not make a misstep that might displease the Jesuits. You see? I'm going to repeat that. So Spellman even took his Jesuit political mentor, Father Gannon of Fordham University, with him on his recent trip to Rome, just to make certain that he would not make a misstep that might displease the Jesuits. With such Italian prelates as Spellman, the Jesuits can attain their objectives much easier behind a non-Italian international facade, even as Spellman were made Pope. And back to the national emergency with Roosevelt in 1933, this all ties in back to the Jesuits because it was Heinrich Himmler, the head of the Nazi secret police, a devout Catholic Heinrich Himmler, actually modeled the Nazi SS off of the Jesuit order. This is admitted by G. Gordon Liddy, of all people, and it's also documented in Edmund Paris's book, The Secret History of the Jesuits. But that documentation comes from G. Gordon Liddy's book, Will, and that's on my blog here. In the same book, Liddy also admits that the Jesuits rule the world at Fordham University. I was going to read this quote on the blog or on the stream yesterday with Clint, but I didn't get the time to do it. This is the quote here at the bottom where Liddy says that the Jesuits at Fordham rule the world. But this is where Liddy says that Heinrich Himmler modeled his SS off of the Jesuit order, right where I'm highlighting. And it all ties in because the Concordat with Nazi Germany was signed in 1933, the same year that Roosevelt put the United States into a perpetual state of national emergency. I recommend you go through, and the FBI, like I just read here, the FBI uses Roosevelt's National Emergency Declaration to justify all their domestic surveillance. So I'm going to link this. I recommend you read this report. This is the report that Clint was reading out on the show we did yesterday. And just to tie it in, actually, the report, I wanted to tie it into Theodore Roosevelt because I mentioned I found a great document of Theodore Roosevelt speaking to the Knights of Columbus all the way back in 1915. And the President Theodore Roosevelt, who was related to Teddy Roosevelt, and both Teddy and Theodore Roosevelt were related to Catholic priest James Roosevelt Bailey, a Catholic Archbishop of Newark. Both Theodore Roosevelt and FDR were very big on the national emergency to enact martial law. You see here President Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft, who was Skull and Bones. And William Howard Taft had a younger cousin, Robert Francis Taft, S.J., become one of the most powerful American Jesuits. You see President Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft argued the proper role of the president, and perhaps their debate best expounds diametrically opposed philosophies of the presidency. In his autobiography, Theodore Roosevelt asserted his, quote, stewardship theory. This is coming from the Senate report. This is quoting from Theodore Roosevelt, though. My view is that every executive officer was a steward of the people, bound actively and affirmatively to do with all he could for the people and not to content himself with the negative merit of keeping his talents undamaged in a napkin. My belief was that it is not only the president's right, but his duty to do anything that the needs of the nation demanded, unless such action was forbidden by the Constitution or by the laws. Under this interpretation of executive power, I did and caused to be done many things not previously done by the president and heads of departments. I did not usurp power, but I did greatly broaden the use of the executive power. I'm going to repeat this. So this is what Theodore Roosevelt said. I did not usurp power, but I did greatly broaden the use of executive power. In other words, I acted for the common well-being of our people. So people is a legal term. Whatever measure was necessary unless prevented by direct constitutional or legislative prohibition. You see that? That's a pretty, in Roosevelt's autobiography quoted by the Senate report, he's, showing here that he's an advocate of the president acting as a sovereign, acting as a king in feudal 13th century Europe, amassing basically unprecedented power. And actually, this is right in the forward. You'll see, and Clint read this out. The president now, with Roosevelt's national emergency, the president can actually take control of every single business in the United States. You see, so under the powers delegated by these statutes, the president may seize property, organize and control the means of production, seize commodities, assign military forces abroad. And interestingly, the Catholic Church in 1986 created an actual archdiocese, with the jurisdiction being the United States military, the archdiocese of the military services. The president can assign military forces abroad, institute martial law, seize and control all transportation and communication, regulate the operation of private enterprise, restrict travel, and in a plethora of particular ways control the lives of all American citizens. And that came from the Senate report 93-549 right here. And just before I go into the Theodore Roosevelt document with speaking into the Knights of Columbus, which I thought was a great find, Here's a photo that was drawn of Theodore Roosevelt sitting in a chair labeled "Presidency" with the Roman eagle, Roman military wreath, and the Roman fasces like pegged to the chair. And when you on the show, Clint had great information just showing how the United Nations, is acting as like like a worldwide, mega corporate, like a mother hub corporation. The Roman military wreath that you see right here on this chair of Theodore Roosevelt is on the United Nations logo as well. So you can see the United Nations is taking part in this worldwide feudal system. This goes all the way back. We mentioned this a little bit on the show, but this goes back to like Emperor Justinian in the Roman Empire, creating a voluntary system of contractual law. And that's essentially what this is. Like with that, we showed how like through the registering of the birth certificate and the personhood identity is you're volunteering to become a slave of the this current corporate system, which dates all the way back to the ancient Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire never really went away, and that's why all that really happened was it readjusted a bit, and the Pope became the definitive head of the Roman Empire instead of having it the Eastern Roman Emperor and the Western Roman Emperor. That's all that really happened. And like that's the U.S. Treasury building is literally modeled off of a Roman Treasury building. And the U.S. Treasury, just like the NSA, has the Pope's silver key on its logo. And this is why Tupper Saucy's Rulers of Evil book, written in 2001, is a great book to read because it shows that the Jesuits, were very, very involved in the founding of the United States. You see, it's the President Roosevelt here in a photo, sitting in a chair with presidency with the Roman fasces on the chair. And Johnny had a great photo here of Cardinal James Gibbons, who is basically essentially the Cardinal Theodore McCarrick of this day. Gibbons was the Archbishop of Washington. This guy was a power player in American politics in the late 1800s, early 1900s. But here's President Theodore Roosevelt with Roman Catholic Archbishop of Washington, Cardinal James Gibbons. They look like they're really close together, don't they? Like, look at that. But I'll read to you. So this comes from kind of an obscure source, but Theodore Roosevelt. I'll read a speech from the Immigration and Americanization. This is the book where it comes from. Immigration and Americanization. Selected readings, compiled and edited by Philip Davis. And I'll link all these sources in the description. But this was Theodore Roosevelt. He spoke at the Carnegie Foundation. Carnegie is Carnegie basically had a monopoly on steel, along with the Mellons. At this time in history, the Carnegie Foundation was one of the first tax-exempt aristocratic foundations set up in the United States. The Carnegie Foundation was one of the earliest funders of the eugenics movement. In the United States, for instance, along with the Rockefeller Foundation. And a Catholic priest, Theodore Hesburgh, was the president of the Rockefeller Foundation for like 15 years. So this is Teddy Roosevelt's speech here is called Americanism, and that I found like 5 or 6 different presidents now that have openly spoke to the Knights of Columbus. Like I've read out George Bush's speech to the Knight of Columbus in 2004. On my channel, on my blog, I have that on my blog. I have Bush's 2004 speech to the Knights of Columbus, and I have George H.W.'s speech to the Knights of Columbus in 1992 on my channel. And I've also covered Ronald Reagan's speech to the Knights of Malta in 1989, where President Ronald Reagan was actually knighted as a Knight of Malta, as a sitting U.S. president. But you see here in the footnote, in Theodore Roosevelt's speech here, Americanism, you see this is an address delivered before the Knights of Columbus, Carnegie Hall, New York. The Knights of Columbus have tons of power in America today. If you saw the video I did on the police, the Knights of Columbus, they're honoring pretty much like every single police department in the United States and Canada is being honored by the Knights of Columbus. Okay, and the Knights of Columbus use the same fasces logo, which is the logo of the Roman Empire control system, which the Jesuits are on top of. So I'm just going to read some of President Theodore Roosevelt's speech to the Knights of Columbus here. Yeah, how's it going, guys? Yeah, I would say I think truther is a word that they use to mock us. But yeah, this is a truth channel. I don't have a I don't have a big budget or anything. I'm just a dedicated researcher who puts out a lot of the stuff that I find. Yeah, this is definitely a truth channel. But just so this is the speech that Theodore Roosevelt gave to the Knights of Columbus in 1915 at Carnegie Hall. And this is like 7 pages. I'm going to read this and then close up the video here. And the purpose of this video being seen that the Vatican, is very supportive, and they're behind this whole, idea of the constant national emergency, which the United States is in. And actually, it says this in the Senate report. Just before, where is this here? It actually says, like, in the report, that most Americans have spent their entire lives under a national emergency. I just want to see if I can find that here really quick. Let me see if I can. Like, they actually admit that, like, most American citizens have spent their entire lives, or United States citizens. Yeah, for here, first page, introduction. The majority of the people of the United States have lived all of their lives under emergency rule. This is in 1973. For 40 years, freedoms and governmental procedures guaranteed by the Constitution have in varying degrees been abridged by laws brought into force by states of national emergency. So they actually admit that in the Senate report, that, and to this day, like, it's even less now. Like, it's even a smaller number of Americans that, like, lived in the United States before this perpetual national emergency was placed on us. But here's back to Theodore Roosevelt. Okay, so for centuries and a quarter have gone by since Columbus, by discovering America, opened the greatest era in world history. And actually, I covered on the show with Clint that Christopher Columbus signed his bull Inter Carrera. And with that papal bull, Christopher Columbus was essentially sailing to conquer North America for the Roman Empire. Headed at that time by Pope Alexander VI. The Vatican is a perpetual corporation that remains in existence. One pope goes, the next pope, comes in to fill the corporate office. But you see here, so Roosevelt says, for centuries and a quarter have gone by since Columbus, by discovering America, opened the greatest era in world history. And just reiterating, these words come from Theodore Roosevelt. For centuries have passed, and he's speaking to the Knights of Columbus. For centuries have passed since the Spaniards began that colonization on the mainland, which has resulted in the growth of the nations of Latin America. 3 centuries have passed since, with the settlements on the coast of Virginia and Massachusetts, the real history of what is now the United States began. All of this we ultimately owe to the action of an Italian seaman in the service of a Spanish king and a Spanish queen. It is eminently fitting that one of the largest and most influential social organizations of this great republic, and actually, he's actually referencing it because people don't know this. The Catholic Spain and Catholic France came to America's rescue in the Revolutionary War, which gives further credence that America and the United States was a Jesuit utopian creation from the beginning. Because Catholic Spain and Catholic France wouldn't have come to help the United States if that wasn't the case. I show in the Aver Manhattan preface, I wrote that the Spanish ambassador to the United States, Don Diego de Gardaquy, the Spanish ambassador to the United States, his family had the most prominent banking house in Spain at this time, the Gardaquy banking house. And Don Diego de Gardaquy had a brother, Cardinal Francisco Gardaquy, who was a Catholic cardinal in Spain at this time. And the U.S. during the Spanish-American War had a ship named the U.S. Gardaquy, the USS Gardaquy. There was the USS Gardaquy used in World War II. And there's a statue of this Catholic Don Diego de Gardaquy. And actually, it was the Gardaquy banking house that primarily gave the American Revolutionary Army, they were one of the biggest military funders of the Revolutionary Army, with talking gunpowder, tents, even the uniforms, grenades. But that's what Theodore Roosevelt is referring to there. But he says here, it is eminently fitting that one of the largest, most influential social organizations of this great republic, a republic in which the tongue is English and the blood derived from many sources, should in its name commemorate the great Italian. It is eminently fitting to make an address on Americanism before this society, that being the Knights of Columbus. I wonder what the great Italian he's referring to there. Maybe that's a subtle reference to the Pope. So Roosevelt's saying our democratic principles, we of the United States. You see, he doesn't say we of America or we of the United States of America. He says we of the United States because the United States is the name of the Roman corporation. We of the United States need above all things to remember that we are by blood and culture kin to each of the nations of Europe, who also separate. Let me reread that here. We of the United States need above all things to remember that while we are blood and culture kin to each of the nations of Europe, we are also separate from each of them. We are a new and distinct nationality. We are developing our own distinctive culture and civilization, and the worth of this civilization will largely depend upon our determination to keep it distinctively our own. Our sons and daughters should be educated here and not abroad. We should freely take from every other nation whatever we can make of use. So think of that. Like, just think about American imperialism and like, so he's saying like the U.S. has the right to go into any other nation to take whatever you want. Like, is that what that means? Well, that's what the Catholic Church believes in. The U.S. has become the sword arm of the Catholic Church, as Johnny would say. Roosevelt says we should freely take from every other nation whatever we can make of use, but we should adopt and develop to our own peculiar needs what we thus take, and never be content merely to copy. Our nation is founded to perpetuate democratic principles. You see an address before the Knights of Columbus, Carnegie Hall by Theodore Roosevelt. These principles are that each man is to be treated on his worth as a man without regard to the land from which his forefathers came and without regard to the creed which he professes. If the United States proves false to these principles of civil and religious liberty, it will have inflicted the greatest blow on the system of free popular government that has ever been inflicted. Here we have a virgin continent on which to try the experiment of making out of divers race stocks a new nation, and of treating all citizens of that nation in such a fashion as to preserve them equality of opportunity in industrial, civil, and political life. Our duty is to secure each man against injustice by his fellows. Continuing from Theodore Roosevelt. One of the most important things to secure for him is the right to hold and to express the religious views that best meet his own soul needs. Any political movement directed against any body of our fellow citizens because of their religious creed is a grave offense against American principles and American institutions. Interesting, and this is what Samuel Adams said in his letter to Thomas Jefferson about the Jesuits, saying that our system of, and this is part of what the reason the Jesuits in the U.S. Constitution put the religious freedom statute is that it ensured that the Catholic Church could not be persecuted in the United States. And John Adams actually writes to Thomas Jefferson that with our system of religious liberties, we have to grant them, the Jesuits, asylum. But Jefferson says it'll be a miracle if they let me get that exact quote, because it's worth reading the exact quote. This is from President John Adams to Thomas Jefferson. This is from the founders.gov website. This is what John Adams said here. I do not like the late resurrection of the Jesuits. They have a general now in Russia in correspondence with the Jesuits in the U.S. who are more numerous than anybody knows. Shall we not have swarms of them here? As many shapes and disguises as ever. A king of the gypsies bent as many shapes and... Okay, let me repeat that here. Shall we not have swarms of them here, referring to the Jesuits, as many shapes and disguises as ever a king of the gypsies, Banfield Moore Carew himself assumed, in the shapes of printers, editors, writers, and schoolmasters? I have lately read Pascal's letters over again, and 4 volumes of the history of the Jesuits. If any congregation of men could merit eternal perdition on earth and hell, according to these historians like Pascal, truth Catholics, it is this company of Loyola. And this is what I'm referring to here. Our system, however, of religious liberty must afford them an asylum. This is what Theodore Roosevelt wants to make sure the Jesuits get a very cozy asylum in the United States. But if they do not put our purity of our elections to a severe trial, it will be a wonder. So John Adams says, but if they, the Jesuits, do not put purity of our elections to a severe trial, it will be a wonder. That's the quote I wanted to read there. And this is coming from founders.archives.gov. Okay, but you see here, it is a wicked thing to either support or oppose a man because of the creed he professes. This applies to Jew and Gentile, to Catholic and Protestant, and to the man who would be regarded as unorthodox by all of them alike. To make sure my phone battery is good. How's it going, everyone? Oh well, yeah. The Jesuits are very involved in the current Hong Kong situation. The Jesuits America magazine actually ran an article saying how Carrie Lam's devout Catholic faith moves her as a leader, something along the lines like that. I have that on my blog. Like the Jesuits actually have a college in Hong Kong called what was the name of that? Wygon College. Let me get the exact name here. The Jesuits have two colleges in Hong Kong. And the Jesuits are like China is like the Jesuits' baby. It's their experiment. That's why the Chinese government built the statue of Jesuit Matteo Ricci with Chinese taxpayer dollars in 2010. Yeah, these are the schools here. So there's Huayan College in Hong Kong, which is Jesuits intelligence post out there, and Carrie Lam, the current leader of Hong Kong, is a devout Catholic, and Carrie Lam is basically a puppet of the Chinese. That's why everyone is protesting out there. Carrie Lam is basically signing over Hong Kong over to China, and it goes deeper. Like Margaret Thatcher and the British sold out Hong Kong to the Chinese back in 1984, but the devout Catholic Carrie Lam is very, very pro-China, and that's why a lot of these protests came up. The Jesuits want to prop up China as much as possible. That's why Jesuit-trained Bill Clinton at Georgetown gave China the top U.S. supercomputing technology in 1997 for the only reason that the Jesuits want to build up China. Same Jesuit-trained Bill Clinton brought China into the World Trade Organization, which stole hundreds of thousands of jobs from the United States and moved them over to China for the same reason that the Jesuits are now actually aligning themselves behind China. And I think the Jesuits are preparing for a future where China is the number one world power. That's what I think is going to happen. I'm not saying that's definitive, but that's what I think. But going back here to the Theodore Roosevelt, political movements directed against men because of their religious belief and intended to prevent men of that creed from holding office have never accomplished anything but harm. This was true in the days of the Know Nothing, and the Know Nothing movement was actually the anti-Catholic movement in the United States, in the Native American parties in the middle of the last century, and it is just as true today. Such a movement directly contravenes the spirit of the Constitution itself. Washington and his associates believed that it was essential to the existence of this republic that there should never be any union of church and state. Oh, really? And I showed you the photo of Theodore Roosevelt with Cardinal James Gibbons, Archbishop of Washington, earlier. And such union is partially accomplished whenever a given creed is aided by the state or when any public servant is elected or defeated because of his creed. The Constitution explicitly forbids the requiring of any religious test as a qualification for holding office. To impose such a test by popular vote is as bad as it is as to impose it by law. To vote for or against a man because of his creed is to impose upon him a religious test and is a clear violation of the spirit of the Constitution. Moreover, it is well to remember that these movements never achieve the end they nominally have in view. They do nothing whatsoever except to increase among the men of the various churches the spirit of sectarian intolerance, which is base and unlovely in any civilization, but which is utterly revolting amongst a free people that profess the principles we profess. No such movement can ever permanently succeed here. You see, this is all smoke and mirrors, because Teddy Roosevelt knew well at this time that the Jesuits were in full control of the United States by 1915. But continuing, all that it does is for a decade or so greatly. All that it does or so for a decade or to greatly increase the spirit of theological animosity both among the people to whom it appeals and among the people whom it assails. Furthermore, it has in the past invariably resulted in so far as it was successful at all in putting unworthy men into office. For there is nothing that a man of loose principles and evil practices in public life so desires as the chance to distract attention from his own shortcomings and misdeeds by exciting and inflaming theological and sectarian prejudice. That's a way of just saying that if there's a president that's going to challenge the power of the Catholic Church, he's just a hate-filled person who has his own problems. That's what that means. But continuing. We must recognize that it is a cardinal sin against democracy to support a man for public office because he belongs to a given creed or to oppose him because he belongs to a given creed. It is just as evil to draw the line between class and class, between occupation and occupation in political life, No man who tries to draw either line is a good American. True Americanism demands that we judge each man on his conduct, that we so judge him in private life, and that we so judge him in public life. The line of cleavage drawn on principle and conduct in public affairs is never in any healthy community identical with the line of cleavage between creed and creed or between class and class. On the contrary, where the community life is healthy, these lines of cleavage almost always run nearly at right angles to one another. It is eminently necessary to all of us that we should have able and honest public officials in the nation, in the city, in the state, if we make a serious and resolute effort to get such officials of the right kind, men who shall not only be honest, but shall be able and shall take the right view of public questions. We will find, as a matter of fact, that the men we thus choose will be drawn from the professors of every creed and from among men who do not adhere to any creed. For 35 years, I have been more or less actively engaged in public life and the performance of my political duties, in a public position, now in a private position. I have fought with all the fervor I possessed for the various causes in which with all my heart I believed. In every fight I thus made, I had with me and against me Catholics, Protestants, and Jews. There have been times, and this is Theodore Roosevelt speaking to the Knights of Columbus, just a reminder. There have been times where I've had to make the fight for or against some men of each creed on grounds of plain public morality, unconnected with questions of public policy. There are other times I had made such a fight for or against a given man, not on grounds of public morality, for he may have been morally a good man, but on account of his attitude in questions of public policy or of government principle. In both cases, I have always found myself fighting beside and fighting against men of every creed. And he's just, this is just, classic, smoke and mirrors, the surface level stuff here, but just continuing. The one sure way to have secured the defeat of every good principle worth fighting for would have been to have permitted the fight to be changed into along sectarian lines and inspired by the spirit of sectarian bitterness, either for the purpose of putting into public life or keeping out of public life the believers in any given creed. Such conduct represents an assault upon Americanism. The man guilty of it is not a good American. I hold that in this country there must be a complete severance of church and state, that public money shall not be used for the purpose of advancing any particular creed. And you see the Catholic Church, this was ultimately just a Trojan horse in a smokescreen, because after the Catholic Church killed John F. Kennedy through their CIA, the CIA director was a devout Catholic, John McCone, Knight of Malta, Knight of St. Gregory the Great, Knight of St. Sylvester. Because Kennedy, as a Catholic, came out and said, I do not support public funds going to the churches. Jesuit trained at Georgetown, Lyndon Johnson passed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act in 1965, which got an annual $286 million going to sectarian schools, out of which of that $286 million, $256 million went to Catholic schools. Lyndon Baines Johnson also signed the War on Poverty. You can see his term "war on poverty" is incorporating the permanent national emergency, because everything is the war on everything: the war on poverty, the war on drugs, the war on the border, blah blah blah, the war on terror. But the war on poverty with Jesuit-trained Lyndon Baines Johnson got the government giving millions and millions and millions, ultimately billions of dollars subsidized to the Catholic Church and all religions. Most of the funds went to the Catholic Church, though, to finance their Catholic charities and relief services. So you can see here this, and George Bush, when he spoke to the Knights of Columbus, said that I do believe in a separation of church and state, but we shouldn't do away with the church. That's what Bush said. So they all have to say we believe in a separation of church and state on the surface. And this is the same George W. Bush that actually said he saw God in the eyes of Pope Benedict XVI. You see, and therefore that the public schools shall be non-sectarian, and as a necessary clarity to this, I'm pronouncing that wrong. Not only the pupils, but the members of the teaching force and of the school officials of all kinds must be treated exactly on a par, no matter what their creed, and there must be no more discrimination against Jew or Catholic or Protestant than discrimination in favor of a Jew, Catholic, or Protestant. Whoever makes such discrimination is an enemy of the public schools. I wonder if he would call Cardinal Spellman an enemy of the public schools. But would he say that to Cardinal Spellman? Nope. This is what Theodore Roosevelt would do. Zip his mouth. That's what he did. He never protested Cardinal Spellman. Cardinal Spellman was actually protesting the federal government giving federal money to public schools. He said, why are you funding public schools when you can give money to Catholic schools? I have that in the article in the Pittsburgh Catholic. But so this continuing from Theodore Roosevelt. What is true of creed is no less true of nationality. There is no room in this country for hyphenated Americanism. When I refer to hyphenated Americans, I do not refer to naturalized Americans. Some of the very best Americans I have ever known were naturalized Americans, Americans born abroad. But a hyphenated American is not an American at all. And this is what he means by hyphenated American is actually a United States citizen. This is what like the whole show with me and Clint did just yesterday was all kind of breaking down like the lingo of like what it actually is a United States citizen. You see, a hyphenated American is not an American at all. This is just true of a man who puts native before the hyphen, as of the man who puts German or Irish or English or French before the hyphen. Americanism is a matter of the spirit and the soul. Our allegiance must be purely to the United States. That's the corporate title. We must unsparingly condemn any man who holds any other allegiance. Look, so our allegiance must be to the United States, and we must unsparingly condemn any man who holds any other allegiance. But if he is heartily and singly loyal to this republic, then no matter where he is born, he is just as good an American as anyone else. The absolutely certain way of bringing this nation to ruin and preventing all possibility of its continuing to be a nation at all would be to permit it to become a tangle of squabbling nationalities, an intricate knot of German Americans, Irish Americans, English Americans, French Americans, Scandinavian Americans, or Italian Americans, each preserving its separate nationality, each at heart feeling more sympathy with Europeans of that nationality than with other citizens of the American Republic. The men who do not become Americans and nothing else are hyphenated. The men who do not become Americans and nothing else are hyphenated Americans, and there ought to be no room for them in this country. The man who calls himself an American citizen, who yet shows by his actions that he is primarily the citizen of a foreign land, plays a thoroughly mischievous part in the life of our body politic. And again, like really, so he says that, but at the same time, he's really no problems hanging out with Cardinal James Gibbons, who is representing a political institution, the Roman Catholic Church, and Cardinal James Gibbons is actually Cardinal James Gibbons' allegiances is to the Vatican over America by definition, being a Catholic cardinal. But yet Teddy Roosevelt has no problem with him. He's not a hyphenated American, right? No. And really, what he means by what Roosevelt wants the true American to be is just the serf to the the state, church and state apparatus. He mentioned that's kind of in the background through his speech here. You see, he has no place here, but accordingly, Cardinal Gibbons does, right? He has no place here, but Cardinal Gibbons does. And the sooner he returns to the land which he feels in his real heart allegiance, the better it will be for every good American. Really. So there's no such thing as a hyphenated American who is a good American. The only man who is a good American is the man who is an American and nothing else. I appeal to history. Among the generals of Washington in the Revolutionary War were Greene, Putnam, and Lee, who were of English descent, Wayne and Sullivan, who are of Irish descent, Marion, who is of French descent, Schuyler, who is of Dutch descent, and Muhlenberg and Herkimer, who are of German descent. But they were all of them Americans and nothing else, just as much as Washington. Charles Carroll of Carrollton, Jesuit-trained Charles Carroll, was a Catholic. Charles Carroll of Carrollton was related to Jesuit priest John Carroll, who founded Georgetown. Hancock, a Protestant. Jefferson was how do you pronounce it? Jefferson was heterodox, from the standpoint of any Orthodox creed. But these and all other signers of the Declaration of Independence stood on an stood on an equality of duty and right and liberty as Americans and nothing else. So be it was in the Civil War. Farragut's father was born in Spain, and Sheridan's father in Ireland. Sheridan, another devout Catholic soldier. Sheridan and Thomas were of English, and Custer of German descent, and Grant came of a long time of American ancestors whose original home had been Scotland. But the admiral was not of Spanish American, and the generals were not Scotch Americans or Irish Americans or English Americans or German Americans, They were all Americans and nothing else. This was just as true as Lee and of Stonewall Jackson and of Beauregard. When in 1909 our battle fleet returned from its voyage around the world, Admirals Wainwright and Schroeder represented the best traditions and the most effective action in our Navy. One was the old American blood of English. One was of old American blood and of English descent. The other was the son of German immigrants. But one was not a Native American and the other a German American. Each was an American, pure and simple. Each bore allegiance only to the flag. Each bore allegiance only to the flag of the United States. And you see, like, he's naming it the United States, like, for a reason, because it's the corporate title. Each would have been incapable of considering the interests of Germany or England or any other country except the United States. And this is actually, he talks about the Panama Canal here. And there's information on Teddy Roosevelt in Aver Manhattan's book, The Dower and the Vatican, especially with the Panama Canal purchase. To take charge of the most important work under my administration, the building of the Panama Canal, I chose General Goethals. Both his parents were born in Holland, but he was just plain United States. He wasn't a Dutch American. If he hadn't been, I wouldn't have appointed him. So it was with such men among those who served under me as Admiral Osterhaus and General Barry. The father of one was born in Germany, the father of the other in Ireland. But they were both Americans, pure and simple, and the first-rate fighting men in addition. In my cabinet at the time, there were men of English and French, German, and Dutch blood. And actually, in Roosevelt's cabinet was his attorney general was the descendant of Napoleon Bonaparte, devout Catholic, Charles Joseph Bonaparte, who would go on to be the founder of the Bureau of Investigation, which would then become the FBI. But they were all Americans and nothing else, and every one of them was incapable of thinking of himself or his fellow countrymen except in terms of American citizenship. If any one of them had anything in the nature of a dual or divided allegiance in his soul, he would have never been appointed to serve under me, and he would have been instantly removed when the discovery was made. There wasn't one of them who was capable of desiring that the policy of the United States should be shaped with reference to the interests of any foreign country or with consideration for anything outside the general welfare of humanity, save the honor and interest of the United States, and each was incapable of making any discrimination whatsoever among the citizens of the country he served, and our common country, save discrimination based on conduct and conduct alone. I think the speech is almost done here, but for an American citizen to vote as a German American, as an Irish American, or as an English American is to be a traitor to American institutions. But he has no problem, he's cozying up to the Cardinal James Gibbons. He has no problem with the Roman Catholic Church infiltrating America. No problem with that, though. So you can see Teddy Roosevelt was like a professional gaslighter. Like he actually was a professional gaslighter. Like he did the gaslighting about being supposedly against the trusts, while his entire campaign was financed by the financial aristocratic barons. And so Aver Manhattan shows that in The Dollar and the Vatican. You see, and those hyphenated Americans who terrorize American politicians by threats of the foreign vote are engaged in treason to the American Republic. Yeah. Really. So according to that definition, like every single United States president, has engaged in treason because they're aligned and their allegiances are to a foreign ecclesiastical power, the Vatican, according to that definition. But continuing from Roosevelt, so now this is a declaration of principles. How are we in practical fashion to secure the making of these principles part of the fiber of our national life? First and foremost, let us all resolve that in this country hereafter we shall place far less emphasis on the question of right and much greater emphasis upon matter of duty. A republic can't succeed and won't succeed in the tremendous international stress of the modern world unless its citizens possess that form of high-minded patriotism which consists in putting devotion to duty before the question of individual rights. Look at that. So then this ties in back to the national emergency because Teddy Roosevelt supports like a national emergency in this like speech given to the Knights of Columbus. So look, so patriotism, you must put duty, citizens possess that form of high-minded patriotism which consists of putting devotion to duty before a question of individual rights. That's the philosophy of the Third Reich. And your rights don't matter. It's your duty to serve the state. Exactly the motto of Nazi Germany, for instance. This is coming from President Theodore Roosevelt at the Knights of Columbus Convention in 1915. at Carnegie Hall. So you see here, this must be done in our family relation. Pardon me there. Water drink went down the wrong hole. Or the family will go to pieces. And no better track for family life in this country can be imagined than the little story called Mother, written by an American woman, Kathleen Norris, who happens to be a member of your own church. Look at that. So this is from Theodore Roosevelt. And no better track for family life in this country, the United States, can be imagined than the little story called Mother, written by an American woman, Kathleen Norris, who happens to be a member of your church, the Knights of Columbus. Your church. Whose church is the Knights of Columbus? The Roman Catholic Church. Would you look at that? What is true of the family, the foundation stone of our national life, is not less true of the entire superstructure. I am, as you know, the most ardent believer in national preparedness against war. You see, this goes into the emergency here. Pardon me. I am, as you know, the most ardent believer in national preparedness against war as a means of securing the honorable and self-respecting peace, which is the only peace desired by all spirited people. But it is an absolute impossibility to secure such preparedness in full and proper form if it is an isolated feature of our policy. The lamentable fate of Belgium has shown that no justice in legislation or success in business will be of the slightest avail if the nation is not prepared in advance the strength to protect its rights. But it's equally true that there cannot be this preparation advanced for military strength unless there is a social basis for civil and social life behind it. There must be economic and military preparedness, all alike, all harmoniously developed, and above all, there must be spiritual and mental preparedness. You look at that. There must not be preparedness in things material. There must be preparedness in soul and mind. To prepare against an army and navy without preparing a proper national spirit would avail nothing. And there is not only a proper national spirit, but also proper national intelligence. We should realize that even from the standpoint of the Army and Navy, some civil preparedness is indispensable. For example, a plan for national defense, which does not include the most far-reaching use and cooperation of our railroads, must prove largely futile. These railroads are organized in a time of peace, but we must have the most carefully thought-out organization from the national and centralized standpoint in order to use them in times of war. And, with the national emergency, like as I read earlier in the Senate report of this video, the president actually has the right to take over all property in the United States in a national emergency. He can do it whenever he wants, essentially. You see that right here. Under the powers delegated by these statutes, the president may seize property, organize and control the means of production, seize commodities, assign military forces abroad, institute martial law, seize and control all transportation and communication, regulate the operation of private enterprise, restrict travel, and in a plethora of particular ways control the lives of all American citizens. You can see here, I'm just pointing this out because Theodore Roosevelt is, promoting this in a speech he gave to the Knights of Columbus, of all people, at Carnegie Hall in 1915. I'm just going to read a little bit more, then check the comments. This means that first, that those in charge of them from the highest to the lowest must understand their duty in time of war, must be permeated with the spirit of genuine patriotism. And second, that they and we shall understand that efficiency is as essential to patriotism as one is useless without the other. Really? So efficiency is as essential as patriotism. So that's saying it's patriotic for American companies to replace all of their workers with machines and contribute to more poverty in the United States. That's patriotic because you're creating a more efficient society, according to Theodore Roosevelt. Again, every citizen should be trained sedulously by every activity at our command to realize his duty to the nation. In France, at this moment, the working men who are not at the front are spending all their energies with the single thought of helping their brethren at the front by what they do in the munition plant, on the railroads, in the factories. It is a shocking, lamentable thing that many of the trade unions of England have taken a directly opposite view. I'm not concerned with whether it be true as they assert that their employers are trying to exploit them, or as their employers assert that the labor men are trying to gain profit for those who stay at home at the cost of their brethren who fight in the trenches. That Roosevelt would take the latter approach. The latter opinion, because Roosevelt was actually one of the big voices advocating for the creation of the Pennsylvania State Police. And the creation for the Pennsylvania State Police initially was to crush strikes taking place at plants all over Pennsylvania. The thing for us Americans to realize is that we must do our best to prevent similar conditions from growing up here. Business, you see, we have to have a comfortable environment for our robber barons. That's what that means. That's exactly what that means, actually. Businessmen, professional men, and wage workers alike must understand that there should be no question of their enjoying any rights whatsoever unless, in the fullest way, they recognize and live up to the duties that go with those rights. That is just as true of the corporation as of the trade union, and if either corporation or trade union fails heartedly to acknowledge this truth, then its activities are necessarily antisocial and detrimental to the welfare of the body politic as a whole. In wartime, when the welfare of the nation is at stake, and the U.S. is to Franklin Roosevelt, or Teddy Roosevelt's cousin Franklin Roosevelt, in March 9th, 1993, with the Emergency Banking Act, made the United States into a perpetual state of national emergency, aka war, essentially. You see, in wartime, when the welfare of the nation is at stake, it should be accepted as axiomatic that what the employer is to make no profit out of the war, save that which is necessary to the efficient running of the business and the living expenses of himself and family, and that the wage worker is to treat his wage from exactly the same standpoint, is to see that the labor organization to which he belongs is in all activities subordinated to the service of the nation. And you see, like, that's actually a way, and this is just like the Monsignor John Ryan's idea of a just profit. He said that, like, oh, we need to redistribute wealth, but wealth should be redistributed. What was the quote? He said that the wealth should be distributed to the portion of those that have stocks invested in the company, because like the CEO and the rich stockholders are employees too, and they work hard just like everyone else on the production line. So it's okay for the CEO to make 300 times more than the average employee, because that's the just profit, according to Monsignor John A. Ryan, who was actually Franklin D. Roosevelt's one of his main economists, was a Catholic priest, of all people, Monsignor John A. Ryan. And actually, Monsignor Ryan had a big part to play in the New Deal with Franklin Roosevelt, which I showed earlier in the video, which is just getting the government to subsidize big business. And the United States at this point was already a corporation. But this is why Lockheed Martin got $35 billion last year from the U.S. government. Raytheon got like $14 billion, for instance. And that's not counting the Export-Import Bank, which FDR created via executive order. But continuing from President Theodore Roosevelt's speech to the Knights of Columbus, I believe this will be almost done. This is a longer speech. I thought this was a great find, so I just wanted to read this out, all on my channel. So that now there must be some application of their spirit of times of peace, or we cannot suddenly develop it in time of war. So, geez, look at that. So this is justification to have the U.S. in a perpetual state of national emergency or full military rule, which is what has happened. Now there must be some application of this spirit in times of peace, or we cannot suddenly develop it in a time of war. The strike situation in the United States at this time is a scandal to the country as a whole and discreditable alike to the employer and employee. Any employer who fails to recognize that human rights come first and that the friendly relationship between himself and those working for him should be one of partnership and comradeship and mutual help, no less than self-help, is recreant to his duty as an American citizen, and it is to his interest, having in view the enormous destruction of life in the present war, to conserve and to train to higher efficiency alike for his benefit and for its the labor supply. So again, it's all about like how, like, in the times of war, it's an excuse to run up more efficiency. You can use it's an emergency. Oh, you have to stay at work, for 12 hours now instead of 8. It's an emergency. We have to make more gunpowder so the DuPonts can sell it. So that the DuPonts can buy their 15th yacht. That's why you got to, go in and put 12 hours in that. It's a national emergency. That's basically essentially what's going on. In return, any employee who acts along the lines publicly advocated by the men who profess to speak for the IWW is not merely an open enemy of business, but his entire country, and is out of place in our government. Look, so any employee who objects to working slave hours under a bullshit excuse of a quote national emergency is an open enemy of business. He's not just an open enemy of business; he's an enemy of his entire country and is out of the place in our government. That's interesting. So this is back to President Theodore Roosevelt. You, Knights of Columbus, are particularly fitted to play a great part in the movement for national solidarity, without which there can be no real efficiency in either peace or war. I'm going to repeat that from President Theodore Roosevelt. You, Knights of Columbus, are particularly fitted to play a great part in the movement for national solidarity, without which there can be no real efficiency in either peace or war. During the last year and a quarter, it has been brought home to us in startling fashion that many of the elements of our nation are not yet properly fused. It ought to be literally appalling fact that the members of two foreign embassies in this country have been discovered to be implicated in inciting their fellow countrymen, whether naturalized American citizens or not, to the destruction of property and the crippling of American industries that are operating in accordance with eternal law and international agreement. The malign activity of one of these embassies has been brought home directly to the ambassador. I believe he's actually talking about there was a plot with Franz von Papen, actually, who was a papal chamberlain. This is Germany at this time, because World War I, like the Kaiser Wilhelm I of Germany, or Kaiser Wilhelm II, in his memoirs, page 211, says that Germany in World War I was to be the sword of the Catholic Church. But I think he's referring here to the German spy scandal with Catholic Franz von Papen in the United States. This actually reached into Canada too. There was a plan to blow up the Welland Canal right in this time around World War I. The activities of the other have been set forth in detail by the publication in the press of its letters in such fashion as to make it perfectly clear that they were of the same general character. Of course, the two embassies were merely carrying out the instructions of their home governments. Nor is it the Germans and Austrians who take the view that as a matter of right they can treat their countrymen resident in America, even if naturalized citizens of the United States, as their allies and subjects, to be used in keeping alive separate national groups profoundly anti-American in sentiment, if the contest comes between American interests and those of foreign lands in question. It has recently been announced that the Russian government is to rent a house in New York as a national center to be Russian in faith and patriotism, to foster the Russian language and to keep alive the national feeling in immigrants who come hither. All this is utterly antagonistic to the proper American sentiment, which rather perpetuated in the name of Germany, Austria, of Russia, of England, of France, or of any other country. And again, like Theodore Roosevelt has no problem with an apostolic delegate being appointed, to the United States, it seems. But there he's gaslighting about a Russian embassy coming to America. We continue. So we should meet the situation by the one hand seeing that these immigrants get all their rights as American citizens, and on the other hand insisting that they live up to their duties as American citizens. Any discriminations against aliens is wrong, for it tends to put the immigrant at a disadvantage and to cause him to feel bitterness and resentment during the very years when he should be preparing himself for American citizenship. If an immigrant is not fit to become a citizen, he should not be allowed to come here. If he is fit, he should be given all the rights to earn his own livelihood and to better himself that any man can have. Take such matter as a literacy test. I entirely agree with those who feel that many very excellent possible citizens would be barred improperly by an illiteracy test. But why do you not admit aliens under a bond to learn to read to write within a certain time? It would then be a duty to see that they were given ample opportunity to learn to read to write, and that if they were deported if they failed to take advantage of the opportunity. No man can be a good citizen if he is not at least in process of learning to speak the language of his fellow citizens. And an alien who remains here without learning to speak English for more than a certain number of years should at the end of that time be treated as having refused to take preliminary steps necessary to complete Americanization and should be deported. But there should be no denial or limitation of the alien's opportunity to work, to own property, and to take advantage of civic opportunities. Special legislation should deal with the aliens who do not come here to be made citizens, but the alien who comes here intending to become a citizen should be helped in every way to advance himself, should be removed from every possible disadvantage. In return should be required under penalty of being sent back to the country from which he came to prove that he is in good faith fitting himself to be an American citizen. Okay, continuing here. I just want to see how many more pages this goes to. Yeah, it looks like there's a little bit more here. I've started reading this, so I kind of got to go through it all now. Yeah, but this is why the military preparedness. This part is very interesting, and this ties into the national emergency. I'll retitle the video, and I'll put the Roosevelt Knights of Columbus address in the video title, because that'll take up like a good chunk of the video block. He says, therefore, we should devote ourselves as a preparative preparedness alike in peace and war to secure the three elemental things: one, a common language, the English language; two, to increase our social loyalty; citizenship absolutely undivided, a citizenship which acknowledges no flag except the flag of the United States. You see, and this is like, it's almost like Roosevelt's promoting, I guess, like it's all about the citizen of the United States. And as you show the United States citizens, it's basically a legal system trust where like you're property of the United States. This is what the Jesuits intended. Like, there's actually a quote in Tupper Saucy's book Rulers of Evil where he quotes the Jesuits saying America was designed to be a nation for sinners. And this ties to the legal term insinuare, which means to be, it comes from the insinuare, comes from Roman Latin trust law. It means to be deposited into a public registry, which is what happens with the drafting of a birth certificate. I don't want to. Oh, it looks like my phone just died here. I'll check the chat on the computer after this. Yeah, I don't know. It looks like this is a long speech here that Roosevelt gave to the Knights of Columbus at Carnegie Hall. Let me see here. So, so the citizenship should be absolutely undivided loyalty to the United States, toward the United States, citizenship which acknowledges no flag except the flag of the United States, and which emphatically repudiates all duality of intention or national loyalty. And third, an intelligent and resolute effort of the removal of industrial and social unrest, an effort for which I'll aim equally at securing every man his rights, and aims to make every man understand that unless he is in good faith, performs his duties, he is not entitled to any rights at all. Would you look at that? So he says, Roosevelt says that, and that we shall aim at securing every man his rights, and to make every man. Oh wait, where was the business? Okay, so third, an intelligent and resolute effort for the removal of industrial and social unrest, an effort for which shall aim equally at securing every man his rights. Really, I think that's more an aim which will crush workers' rights and to secure all property and wealth for the robber barons. That's what he actually means. And to make every man understand that unless he is in good faith, unless you go along with it, unless you bow down to the industrial business aristocracy and perform your duties, you're not entitled to any rights at all. That's what he's saying. The American people should itself do these things for the immigrants. If we leave the immigrant to be helped by the representatives of foreign governments, by foreign societies, by oppressed institutions conducted in a foreign language in the interest of foreign governments, and if we permit the immigrants to exist as alien groups, each group sundered from the rest of the citizens of the country, we shall store up for ourselves bitter trouble in the future. Roosevelt probably knows. Maybe he was, prepped at this time of the Vatican plan to flood the United States with Catholic immigrants. Maybe he was, but that's what he's, foreshadowing right there. So this is military preparedness. This goes into the national emergency topic that I was covering at the beginning of this video. So this is from Theodore Roosevelt speaking to the Knights of Columbus in 1915. I am certain that the only permanently safe attitude for this country as regards to national preparedness for self-defense is along its lines of universal service on the Swiss model. Interestingly, Switzerland is the most democratic of nations. Its army, the most democratic army in the world. There isn't a touch of militarism or aggressiveness about Switzerland. That's right. That's where both sides during both world wars invested all their money. That's why Switzerland remained neutral. It has been found that as a matter of actual practical experience in Switzerland, that the universal military training has made a very marked increase in social efficiency and in the ability of man thus trained to do well for himself in industry. The man who has received the training is a better citizen, is more self-respecting, more orderly, and better able to hold his own and more willing to respect the rights of others, and at the same time he is more valuable and a better paid man in his business. We need that the Navy and the Army should be greatly increased, and that their efficiency as units in the aggregate should be increased to an even greater degree than their numbers. An adequate regular reserve should be established. Economy should be insisted on, and first of all, in the abolition of useless Army posts and Navy yards. But they won't do that. Like, it's good to have useless Army posts and Navy yards for big contracts for the big defense firms. And with FDR, now the government is actually financing all the big defense firms. So the National Guard should be supervised and be controlled by the Federal War Department. And actually, I'm pretty sure the National Guard, just with the national emergency that was signed after 9/11, President George W. Bush, now I believe the president now actually is in command of the National Guard rather than the governor of each state, because each state has their own local National Guard unit. Training camps such as at Plattsburgh should be provided on a nationwide basis, and the government should pay the expenses. Foreign-born as well as native-born citizens should be brought together in those camps, and each man at the camp should take the oath of allegiance as unreservedly and unqualifiedly as the man of its regular army and navy now take it. Not only should battleships, battlecruisers, submarines, ample coast and field artillery be provided, and greater ammunition supply system, but there should be a utilization of those engaged in such professions as the ownership and management of motor cars, in aviation, and in the profession of engineering. Map making and road improvement should be attended to, and as I've already said, the railroads brought into intimate touch with the War Department. Moreover, the government should deal with conservation of all necessary war supplies, such as mine products, potash, oil lands, and the like. Furthermore, all munitions plants should be carefully surveyed with special reference to their geographic distribution and for the possibility of increased munition and supply factories. Finally, remember that the men must be sedulously trained in peace to use this material, or we shall merely prepare our ships, guns, and products as gifts to the enemy. And they did a lot of that in World War II. There's read Charles Hyham's book, Trading with the Enemy, for instance. Like, the U.S. actually increased their investment in Germany 40 to 60% from 1932 to 1940. Like the right at the thick of the time when Adolf Hitler was amassing power and implementing all of his police state measures over there in Nazi Germany. But Roosevelt says, all these things should be done in any event, but let us never forget that the most important of all things is introduce universal military service. So at the Knights of Columbus Convention, President Theodore Roosevelt puts forward the idea. This is essentially a draft. He wants to put a draft into the United States. But let me repeat that this preparedness against war must be based upon efficiency and justice in the handling of ourselves in a time of peace. If belligerent governments, while we are not hostile to them but merely neutral, strive nevertheless to make of this nation many nations, each hostile to the others, and none of them loyal to the central government, then it may be accepted as certain that they would do far worse to us in a time of war. If they encourage strikes and sabotage in our munition plants while we are neutral, it may be accepted as axiomatic that they would do far worse to us if they were hostile. And again, so he's taking the phenomena of workers protesting miserable slave labor wages at the big American plants at this time, controlled by the robber barons along the likes of the Rockefellers, the Pews, the Morgans, the DuPonts, the Guggenheims, etc. So if people are protesting the miserable working conditions that the robber barons have set up, they must be enemy of a hostile foreign government. That's what Roosevelt is actually saying. It is our duty from the standpoint of self-defense to secure the complete Americanization of our people, to make the many peoples, and you see people as a legal term, to make the many peoples of this country a united nation, one in speech and feeling, and in all so far as possible sharers in the best that each has brought to our shores. And actually, this all ties in because you see, to be a united nation, one in speech and feeling. This is the logo of the fasci, the rule under one, the rule of the Pope. This is the sovereign rule of the papacy. This is what this all comes back to. The Pope declared in his papal bull Unum Sanctum 1302 that for salvation's sake, every human must be subject to the Roman Pontiff. The Pope has similar in his encyclical Septime Christianae, where Pope Leo XIII says that force is the best means to preserve public peace, tranquility, and order. He says that we need to be united, one in speech and feeling, under his submission, the Pope. But continuing here, the foreign-born population of this country must be an Americanized population. No other can fight the battles of America, either in war or peace. It must talk the language of its native-born fellow citizens. It must possess American citizenship and American ideals. It must stand firm by its oath of allegiance in word and deed. It must show that in the very fact it has renounced allegiance to every prince, potentate, or foreign government. Really, so when George Bush said he saw God in the eyes of the Pope, who is the leader of a foreign government, you can see, these words that Roosevelt, has wrote here, it's all just, surface level on paper. Most of it. There's been some revealing, quotes through in and out, but all this talk about religious liberty, is, shattered in the real world. But continuing, it must be maintained on an American standard of living so as to prevent labor disturbances in important plants and at critical times. None of these objects can be secured as long as we have immigrant colonies, ghettos, and immigrant sections, and above all, they cannot be assured so long as we consider the immigrant only an industrial asset. The immigrant must not be allowed to drift or be at the mercy of the exploiter. Our object is not to imitate one of the older racial types, but to maintain a new American type and then secure loyalty to this type. When Roosevelt was saying this in 1915, from 1840, from the time of the potato famine up to 1915, the Roman Catholic Church in the United States, increased in population, 200%, 200, 300%. And this absolute explosion, the first massive immigration wave to the U.S. was predominantly Catholic, just like this current immigration wave coming from South America is predominantly Catholic, but the first big immigration wave came after the potato famine. Just interestingly, the policy of let alone, which we have hereto pursued, is thoroughly vicious from two standpoints. By this policy, we permitted the immigrants and too often the native-born laborers as well to suffer injustice. Moreover, by this policy, we have failed to impress upon the immigrant and upon the native-born as well that they are expected to do justice as well as receive justice, that they are expected to be heartily and actively and single-mindedly loyal to the flag, no less than to benefit by living under it. We cannot afford to continue to use hundreds of thousands of immigrants merely as industrial assets while they remain social outcasts and menaces any more than 50 years ago. We could afford to keep the black man merely as an industrial asset and not as a human being. We cannot afford to build in a big industrial plant and herd men and women about it without care for their welfare. We cannot afford to permit a squalid overcrowding of the kind of the living system which makes impossible the decencies and necessities of life. We cannot afford the low wage rates in merely seasonal industries, which mean the sacrifice of both the individual and family life and morals to the industrial machinery. It's just interesting that he's saying this now we have to care about, people getting a living wage. But when it comes to military preparedness, when it comes to a national emergency, that goes all out the pipe. If you start, questioning the wages that you're getting, you're now you're basically you're a hyphenated American, you're an enemy of America. Using Roosevelt's words, we cannot afford to leave American mines, munitions plants, and general resources in the hands of alien workmen, alien to America, even likely to be made hostile to America by machinations such as have recently provided in the case. I think I'm on the wrong page here. Let me see here. Okay, so this is where I was at. We cannot afford to leave American mines, munition plants, and general resources in the hands of alien workmen, alien to America, and even likely to be made hostile to America by machinations such as have recently been provided in the case of the two foreign embassies in Washington. We cannot afford to run the risk of having, in the time of war, men working on our railways or working in our munitions plants who would, in the name of duty to their own foreign countries, bring destruction to us. Recent events have shown us that incitements to sabotage and strikes are in the view of at least two of the great foreign powers of Europe within their definition of neutral practices. What would be done to us in the name of war if these things are done to us in the name of neutrality? Yeah, that's putting a lot of fear into the. That's just a fear, you know, a fear driven statement. But continuing, Justice Dowling in his speech has described the excellent fourth degree of your order. Like, so the Order of the Knights of Columbus. Justice Dowling in his speech has described the excellent fourth degree of your order, the fourth degree of the Knights of Columbus, of how in it you dwell upon duties rather than rights, upon the great duties of patriotism and upon national spirit. Really, so like the Knights of Columbus, the fourth degree of the order. This is in actually the what was it? Burke McCarty's book, The Secret. What was the Secret History of the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln? Let me get the. That's on my archive.org page here. And this is the Senate Intelligence Report here. And I'm going to retitle the name of this video because I've spent a good chunk of time here reading through this Theodore Roosevelt document. What was I going to look up here? Fourth degree. Okay, Book McCarty. That was the name I was thinking of. Burke. Burke McCarty actually quotes the oath of the fourth degree Knights of Columbus, and this is the same blood oath of the secret, like the Jesuits take. That you'll strangle any heretic, like you'll murder anyone given the order to do so. You'll disguise yourself as a Jew, a Protestant, a Buddhist, to infiltrate heretic sects and become an agent for the Pope. That's actually what the fourth degree Knight of Columbus oath is, and that's reprinted in this book here, The Suppressed Truth about the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln. And Teddy Roosevelt here is saying that the fourth degree oath of the Knights of Columbus represents the great duties of patriotism and of national spirit. So within the gaslighting in this article, like in the speech, there is some revealing quotes. Justice Dowling in his speech has described the excellent fourth degree of your order, of how in it you dwell upon duties rather than rights, upon the great duties of patriotism and of national spirit. It is a fine thing to have a society that holds up such a standard of duty. I ask you not to make a special effort. And remember, I showed you in the Senate report that President Theodore Roosevelt, like the Senate report on national emergencies, quoted Roosevelt from his autobiography. Him quoting Roosevelt saying like he would want a system where the United States is in like a system of perpetual national emergency where the president, just like medieval kings of Europe in the Dark Ages, could have absolute sovereign power over the realm. So you see here, I ask you to make a special effort to deal with Americanization, the fusing into one nation, and a nation necessarily different from all other nations, all of who come to our shores. Pay heed to the three principal essentials. 1, the need of a common language with the minimum amount of illiteracy. 2, the need of a common civil standard, similar ideals, beliefs, and customs symbolized by an oath of allegiance to America. And 3, the need of a high standard of living, of reasonable equality of opportunity, and social and industrial justice. Social justice, a Jesuit term. In every great crisis in our history, in the Revolution, in the Civil War, and in the lesser crises like the Spanish War, all factions and races have been forgotten in the common spirit of Americanism. Protestant and Catholic men of English or French or of Irish or of German descent have joined with a single-minded purpose to secure for the country what only can be achieved by the resultant union of all patriotic citizens. You of this organization, the Knights of Columbus, have done a great service by your insistence that citizens should pay heed first of all to their duties. Hitherto, undue prominence has been given to question of rights. Your organization, the Knights of Columbus, says President Theodore Roosevelt, is a splendid engine for giving to the stranger within our gates a high conception of American citizenship. Wow. So your organization, the Knights of Columbus, according to President Theodore Roosevelt, is a splendid engine for giving to the stranger within our gates a high conception of American citizenship. Strive for unity. We suffer at present from a lack of leadership in these matters. Even in the matter of national defense, there is such a labyrinth of committees and councils and advisors that there's a tendency on the part of the average citizen to become so confused and do nothing. I ask you to help strike the note that shall unite our people. As a people, we must be united. If we are not united, we shall slip into the gulf of measureless disaster. So you see, we have to declare a national emergency in peacetime. Just it's an emergency just in case a war or something bad happens. This is the mindset here. We must be strong in purpose for our own defense, and again, national emergencies like suspend the Constitution. Continue, and this is like your freedom of speech, the freedom, the Fourth Amendment, the freedom not to be molested by the police or government agents. For instance, the freedom to freely associate. But we must be strong in our purpose for our defense and bent on securing justice within our borders. If as a nation we are split into warring camps, if we teach our citizens not to look upon one another as brothers, but as enemies divided by the hatred of creed for creed, or of one race against those of another race, surely we shall fail in our great democratic experiment. Our democratic experiment on this continent will go down in a crushing overthrow. I ask you here tonight, and like those like you, to take a formal part in the movement, the young men's movement for greater and better America in the future. All of us, no matter from what our land our parents came from, no matter in what way we may say severely worship our Creator. Let me re-say that there. All of us, no matter from what land our parents came, no matter in what way we severely worship our Creator, must stand shoulder to shoulder in united America. This is basically sound like a Pope speech for ecumenist unity. Post Vatican II, just a comment. We must stand shoulder to shoulder in united America for the elimination of race and religious prejudice. We must stand for a reign of equal justice to both big and small. Really, so HSBC, one of the biggest banks in the world, actually admits that they were laundering billions of dollars of drugs for the Sinaloa drug cartel. Like, they actually admit it, they plead guilty, and no one actually goes to jail. But if you're poor, from rural America, and you're caught selling an ounce of weed, they'll throw the book at you, and you'll be in jail for 15 years. Quite the justice there that Theodore Roosevelt is preaching. We must insist on the maintenance of the American standard of living. We must stand for an adequate national control, which shall better secure a better training of our young men in a time of peace, both for the work of peace and for the work of war. A national emergency. And there's 31 outstanding national emergencies in the United States. I covered that right as the video started. We must direct every national resource, material and spiritual, to the task of not of shirking difficulties, but of training our people to overcome difficulties. Our aim must be not to make life easy and soft, not to soften the soul and body, but to fit us in a virile fashion to do a great work for all mankind. This great work can only be done by a mighty democracy with these qualities of soul, guided by those qualities of mind, which will both make it refuse to do injustice to any other nation, and also enable it to hold against its own aggressive, hold its own against aggression by any other nation. In our relations with the outside world, we must abhor wrongdoing and disdain to commit it, and we must no less disdain the baseness of spirit which lamely submits to wrongdoing. Finally, and most important to all, we must strive for the establishment within our borders of that stern and lofty standard of personal and public neutrality, which shall guarantee to each man his rights, and which shall insist in return upon full performance by each man his duties, both to his neighbor and to the great nation whose flag must symbolize in the future, as it symbolized in the past, the highest hopes of all mankind. And that's Theodore Roosevelt's entire speech to the Knights of Columbus. I read there, Carnegie Hall, 1915, October 12th, 1915. President Theodore Roosevelt's speech to Carnegie Hall. And this speech, I'm going to check the comments. I've been meaning to do that. I just wanted to get that all out there. This speech was given just a few years after 12 years after the Roman Catholic Archbishop of Chicago, James Edward Quigley, boldly declared that when the United States rules the world, within 20 years. So that within 20 years, in 1903, the Archbishop of Chicago says, this country, the United States, is going to rule the world. Kings and emperors will soon pass away, and the democracy of the United States will take their place. The West will soon dominate the country, and what I've seen at the Western patriarchal schools has proved that the generation which follows us will be exclusively Catholic. Look at that. Yeah, I'm gonna check the comments here, and I'm just gonna read to you just what Aber Manhattan said about Theodore Roosevelt, because Aber Manhattan called him out for just what of a two-faced liar he was, and just how much of a hypocrite he was. You could see in the speech I read from him with the Knights of Columbus how much of a hypocrite he was. What of a two-faced liar he was. Hey, how's it going, guys? There's some dude. So a papal encyclical, Miranda Parosius, for understanding how TV is controlled. Yeah, I'll have to check out that encyclical. I haven't read that in its entirety yet. Interestingly, I'll have to check out that. Oh, okay, that's in my YouTube here. That's muted. Making sure. Just a little confused with the screens here. So I got my YouTube and StreamYard open. Okay, but yeah, and I can put comments here on the YouTube. But yeah, I recommend you the Archangel Gabriel. I'll type in. Interestingly, the Archangel Michael is the patron of police, TV actors, and newsmen. But this is from Aber Manhattan. But the Archangel Gabriel, I look like I spelled Gabriel wrong there, but you'll know what I mean. The Archangel Gabriel is actually the patron saint. The Catholic Church has a patron saint for TV like anchors and newsmen and actors on TV. It's the Archangel Gabriel. Just like how the Archangel Michael is the patron saint of police, by the patron saint of lawyers is Sir Thomas More. And just looking at the comment here, staged. Are you talking about shooting? Yeah, like when I referred to the Orlando shooting as staged, yeah, like I referred to like that shooting. I'm very confident that shooting did not happen. Very, very confident. I'm also confident. I'm not going to say though, like definitively that all the the school shootings have been false flags and staged, but some of them certainly have. And the U.S. the United States government, like Barack Obama repealed the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act in 2013, and it's now legal for the U.S. Department of Defense to broadcast the Department of Defense and the State Department is legal for them now to broadcast propaganda domestically inside the United States. Yeah, so let me see. I'm just gonna go through I want to read what Aber Manhattan wrote here about Theodore Roosevelt, and this is what I wrote here. You see, James Roosevelt Bailey, this is my preface. James Roosevelt Bailey, a former Archbishop of Newark, who was an older cousin of American Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt, wasn't a Jesuit himself, but he was educated at St. John's College, which would become Jesuit Fordham University. And just with that Orlando shooting I mentioned, which was staged, I think like Pope Francis immediately after that shooting came out and condemned gun violence and said we all need to come together as one. Pope Francis, the event actually kind of happened right at the same time that the Jesuit Pope Francis came to speak at the United States Congress at the House of Representatives in 2015, and Pope Francis went to Washington to honor a mass or a mural for the supposed victims, and the big crisis actor Christine Leinonen. I had the video on my channel. It did not seem like a real organic reaction whatsoever that Jesuit trained Christine Leinonen had. She has a degree at the University of Detroit Mercy, and she coincidentally, is the lead actor or the head media personality on the ground after the Orlando shooting. The media, out of all the parents and the victims of that supposed shooting, Christine Leinonen got the most media attention. Do you see here? This is what Aber Manhattan says. This is on the edition. I wrote this on page 92. You see, in Theodore Roosevelt, there's some pretty revealing sound bites in that speech I read to you from his talk at the Knights of Columbus Convention in Carnegie. Aber Manhattan writes here, business felt strong enough to buy no longer politicians or sets of politicians, but the presidency itself. Once one of their candidates had become president, political power had been put at their disposal. Their dream of expansion would have been mercilessly eased. With the support of the nation behind them and the backing of the military might of the United States, there are no schemes that they could not promote and ultimately execute to further their expansionism. This is from Aver Manhattan's The Dollar in the Vatican. Having decided upon such a plan, they set to work and chose their quote presidential candidate, Theodore Roosevelt, the unmistakable prototype of gross, crass, and vulgar dictator monk of the early American economic imperialism. Theodore Roosevelt was ambitious, superficial, ignorant, and a megalomaniac. This is Aver Manhattan here. He was the American version of a quote Prussian bully, as President Eliot of Harvard called him. He thrived upon flattery. Flattery is powerful and you saw like how much he was sucking up and like flatterizing the Knights of Columbus just recently. Theodore Roosevelt, thrived upon flattery. Flattery is powerful when backed by dollars. It can be irresistible, even before he became the quote political heir designate of the big industrial and financial corporations, lusting for extra North American expansion. Teddy Roosevelt had been hailed by the Jingo press. The praise swelled his egotism. He openly became a typical professional, unabashed imperialist and a big Navy man. When sent to Washington as Assistant Secretary of Navy, he was sized up as having, quote, come down here looking for war, as stated by Representative T.S. Butler of Pennsylvania of the House Naval Committee. That it was the big American corporations which purchased him, Theodore Roosevelt, his presidency, was corroborated by none other than his opposite presidential number, Judge Alton Brooks Parker. Teddy Roosevelt was underwritten by the big corporations, quote, just as they would underwrite a railroad from here to San Francisco, said Major J.J. Dickinson, an official of the Department of State. Here are some of the multimillionaires who were funding Teddy Roosevelt's campaign. You got G.B. Perkins at the House of Morgan, E.I. Harriman, this is Averell Harriman's father, E.H. Harriman. You got the House of Morgan, you see right here, Daniel G. Reed, founder of the American Can Company, for instance. You see with this continuing, but later investigations into the insurance corporation scandals proved that the New York Life, Equitable, and Mutual Life had given $50,000 each to his funds, while in 1912 the Clapp Committee found out that Standard Oil gave $124,000 to Roosevelt's campaign for president. You see here, and Roosevelt was running this whole time on like a trust-busting campaign. Just like I saw in my speech, he supposedly said he believed in separation of church and state, and he denounced any like Americans who were like allied to a foreign alien government rather than America. But he had no problem hanging out with Cardinal James Gibbons, who is allied to a foreign alien government, Rome, over America. So Theodore Roosevelt was a pretty high-class hypocrite. Probably the Jesuits taught him well. And but continuing here, Teddy Roosevelt's election was bought for him by the big trust, which furnished vast sums of money, as the American writer Mark Twain put it, upon the understanding that, quote, their monopolies were to be shielded and protected in return, adding that Theodore Roosevelt stood convicted, quote, by the redemption of having bought his election to the presidency with money, end quote. Again, Teddy Roosevelt denied it all, upon which Mark Twain, after accusing him of adding, quote, falsehood to his burden of misconduct, and instead of accusing him of, quote, accusing him of treachery for, quote, this is Mark Twain accusing President Theodore Roosevelt for treachery for, quote, obeying the popular demand of attacking the big trust while secretly receiving money from them to buy the presidency, end quote. You know, this is, and just this back to this artist photo of Teddy Roosevelt. Like, this is a very symbolic photo in general of the American president sitting on the presidency chair with the Roman eagle, wreath, and fasces. You see right here, the civic decency in his mouth. You see, this is very, very powerful. Like, the guy who drew this picture, you know, knew how, you know, things operate, you know, in the world. Continuing here just with Aver Manhattan, he had a bit more on Theodore Roosevelt. 1 week before the election, Roosevelt became afraid of losing and sent for Harriman, the railroad magnate, skull and bonesman, who came to Washington. Sent for Harriman, and Harriman came to Washington and agreed to raise $200,000 and actually obtained $260,000. Of these $200,000 were spent in New York alone to buy the votes of 50,000 voters, making a change of 100,000 votes, thus carrying the Empire State and ensuring the Republican victory. And Teddy Roosevelt was a Republican, as Franklin Roosevelt was a Democrat. You see, they play both sides, Teddy Roosevelt not only firmly believed in aggressive North American imperialism, he believed in concocting wars for its benefit. This was in harmony with the personal nastiness of which a typical illustration illustrated by himself is most illuminating. Referring to the Spanish War then in progress, Roosevelt said this in his book, The Rough Riders. Lieutenant Davis's first sergeant, Clarence Gould, killed a Spaniard with this revolver. About the same time, I also shot one. 2 Spaniards leaped from the trenches not 10 yards away. As they turned to run, I closed in and fired twice, missing the first and killing the second. At the time, I did not know of Gould's exploit, and I supposed my feat to be unique. Let me see here. Just a little more quick here. So, for instance, Theodore Roosevelt, personally trained as Rough Riders, yearning for expansionistic adventures, supported by Knight of Malta William Randolph Hearst, one of the first small-brained drummer boys of the great American industrial dinosaur, perpetually drumming all-out support for an even grander American expansion. Roosevelt, like Hearst, I believe this is dinosaurs, but Roosevelt, like Hearst and company, wanted to drive out all European nations from the American continent. To give America to the Americans? Not at all. To give the Americas to the big North American corporations. I think I'm gonna end it here. I didn't intend this video to go on as long as it did. But if you just going back here to the Senate report, to highlight this video, just the Jesuits in the Vatican were very close to Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt, I showed earlier in this video, the photo of him going to Jesuit Fordham and the photo with Roosevelt with Vatican Secretary of State Eugenio Pacelli. But Roosevelt put the United States into a permanent state of national emergency in 1933. And I'm just going to show you the quote again here. Theodore Roosevelt, it's quoted in this report, was very endorsed the idea of a national emergency greatly. And this goes all the way back to the Constitution. This way, you got to read Tupper Saucy's book, Rulers of Evil, because the Jesuits put that clause in the U.S. Constitution that the president grants under an emergency situation. The president gets certain extraordinary powers to continue the medieval feudalism of Middle Ages Europe. While this is loading up here, okay, Theodore. Okay, here's the quote here. Okay, there's the quote of Theodore Roosevelt praising the idea of a national emergency, or praising the idea of more executive power, going to the president, which is what the national emergency is. But let me see if there's anything else I wanted to. Actually, I'll just show you James. This was the Catholic priest who was related to both FDR and Teddy Roosevelt, the Catholic Archbishop of Newark. And I've uploaded this book on my archive.org page, a brief sketch of the early history of the Catholic Church of New York. This Catholic Archbishop was related to the 2 Roosevelt presidents. And actually, this is what I wanted to show you here just before I go. Outstanding. Wikipedia even has a page on this. If you go list of national emergencies in the United States, I believe the first official one was even before March 3rd, 1993. It started with Woodrow Wilson, signed Emergency in Water Transportation of the United States. See, and here's the March 9th, 1933, which put the U.S. into a perpetual state of emergency. It's interesting that Woodrow Wilson was the first Woodrow Wilson was the first U.S. president to actually meet the Pope. He met the Pope at the Vatican, but that was actually the first time that an American president and the Pope met each other. That was Woodrow Wilson and Benedict XV. And Woodrow Wilson had a Jesuit-trained advisor in the White House. And this guy was probably, advocating Wilson to go through with declaring a national emergency and with the Federal Reserve Act and getting into World War I and the likes. But this was Wilson's Joseph Patrick Joe Tumulty. See here. He was a leader in the Irish Catholic political community, best known for his service from 1911 to 1921 as the private secretary of President Woodrow Wilson. Joseph Patrick Tumulty went to Jesuit St. Peter's College in New Jersey, created in 1872 by the Society of Jesus. This college was created 1 year after the United States actually became a corporation via the Organic Act, 1971. But this guy, Joseph Patrick Tumulty, was Woodrow Wilson's Jesuit-trained private secretary while Woodrow Wilson was president. When Woodrow Wilson signed the first United States national emergency, February 5th, 1917. You can see like there's 31 active national emergencies. The ones that are active are still up here. Like Jimmy Carter's national emergency from Iran is still active. A lot of Bill Clinton national emergencies. The proliferation of weapons of mass destruction national emergency. Blocking assets is significant. And actually, you see in the national emergency, this is how they were actually able to justify the war in Iraq. Because the war in Iraq, they didn't have the approval of Congress. Where is this right here? Actually, I'm thinking it was this national emergency act here by Bush blocking property with prohibiting transactions with persons who commit the threaten, persons who threaten to commit or support terrorism. That's actually led to the Department of Homeland Security. Like they had to use 9/11 was done by the Jesuits in the Vatican, the CIA intelligence agencies themselves. But they initially signed the national emergency after 9/11, which gave them the legal means to create the new Department of Homeland Security. There's let me see, Iraq was mentioned here. Yeah, so blocking of Iraqi government property. There's a few. Okay, so this national emergency was protecting the development fund for Iraq and certain other property which Iraq has an interest. Granted, the development fund for Iraq established this, the same day legal protection in the wake of the invasion of Iraq and amidst the Iraq War. So it gave them this national emergency, made the invasion technically legal when it actually, according to the U.S. Constitution, only Congress has the power to declare war. But by the president signing a national emergency, they can get around that. And actually, interestingly, one of the masterminds of the Iraq War was, I'll pull up this guy here. This may be a good way to finish off, just showing the power of the Jesuits, how it all ties back to them. It was Douglas J. Feith. He was Bush's Undersecretary of Defense and Policy for the United States under George Bush, 2001-2005. He's Undersecretary for Defense. He's a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. He's known as this Doug Feith is known as the Pentagon Inspector General report found that Feith's office had developed, produced, and then disseminated alternative intelligence assessments on the Iraq and Al Qaeda relationship, which included some conclusions that were inconsistent with the consensus of the intelligence community. This guy was born into a Jewish family, interestingly, so he's a court Jew who got his doctorate from Georgetown in 1978 and was a professor at Georgetown University. Very interestingly so. But this guy is known as they referenced it on Architect. This guy's known as the architect of the Iraq War, one of them. This was sourced on New York Times, I believe. This guy went to Georgetown. Yeah, Feith has been described as an architect of the Iraq War. That's what I wanted to show you there. But yeah, I think that's all for this one, YouTube. Peace and love. I wasn't intending this video to go on as long as it did, but it's good information. I think it's beneficial. But that's all for this one, YouTube. Peace and love, and Nam Nast. I'll catch you on the next one.